Our house is small and honest. The dining table stands where it has always stood, beneath the window that looks toward the river. The refrigerator hums like an old dog dreaming. Arthur settled into the chair that supports his hips best and watched me rinse the dust from my fingers. I kept thinking of the ribbon as it fell from the scissors, clean and theatrical, and of the quiet that followed the applause when people looked for their cars. There is always a moment after a crowd disperses, when you hear what remains. Today, it was the sound of my phone insisting. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the voicemail tab. A clipped voice announced the first message left Monday at 8:02 a.m. The transcription failed halfway through, but I recognized the measured rhythm of someone trained to keep panic out of their tone. The second message came 10 minutes later, a different person from the same number, formal and careful, asking for a callback regarding recent filings bearing the Caldwell name. By lunchtime on Tuesday, the messages grew longer, the kind that begin with apologies and end with a request to confirm identity. Wednesday's cluster spoke of timelines and Thursday's hinted at potential misrepresentation. Today's final message, left just as the ribbon fell, used words like escalation and review. None of these voices belonged to my children. None of them belonged to my husband. They belonged to people who had learned the difference between a story and the documents that say who owns it. I did not feel heroic clarity. I felt something quieter and more stubborn. The exact feeling I had the year the winter storm cut power, and I kept the grill going on propane while people stomped snow from their boots and whispered about road closures. I rolled my shoulders and listened to Arthur in the other room, adjusting the thermostat, because afternoons make him cold now. He has secrets, my husband. I could see it in the way he looked at the sign in the basement, proud and guilty at once. The crowd on the courthouse steps had clapped for a version of us that fit on a banner. I have no intention of living inside anyone's banner. I opened the message thread with my family and watched the typing bubble appear and vanish from Mark's contact, as if he were practicing sentences and abandoning them. He has always preferred talking to strangers who pay him over talking to me. Tessa sent a link to an article about revitalizing small towns with heritage brands. The article included a stock photo of a smiling woman in an apron. She did not look like a person who cleans griddles at midnight. I closed the thread without responding. There is a flavor to silence in a family. Sometimes it is mercy. Sometimes it is strategy. Today it tasted like a dare. Before I called back the unknown number, I walked to the hall closet and pulled down the shoebox where I keep things too fragile for drawers. Inside lay index cards stained by steam, written in my blocky hand, which batter works when humidity drags. How to keep hash browns crisp without wasting oil, which pie cools fastest in a heat wave. On top of the stack were cassette tapes with dates scrawled in blue pen. I used to record the day's notes when the door finally locked, half for inventory, half to speak to the part of me that needed proof the day had happened. People tell themselves stories to sleep. I made mine tape-shaped because tape can be rewound. I chose one from 1998 by the crack in its case and clicked it into the old player on the top shelf. It whirred, clearing its throat like an elderly choir. My own voice filled the kitchen, younger and tired but certain, listing the names of the men who helped shovel the parking lot at 4 a.m., the high school girl who learned to flip eggs without breaking the yolk, the trucker who left an extra 5 because he liked the way I salted the tomatoes. The voice remembered a town like a ledger and loved it like a hymn. It did not ask permission to exist. Arthur appeared in the doorway and leaned on the frame as if it were part of him. He watched me listening to myself. He looked like a man who wanted forgiveness for something not yet confessed. He was still my partner. He was also, today, a witness I would one day need to swear the truth. I nodded toward the chair across from me, and he took it. I slid the cassette back into its case. There would be time to ask him what he signed, when, and why. Today did not require answers. Today required the first step. I dialed the number that had tried 327 times to reach me. When the automated system routed me to a person, I told them my name and the town and the years I ran the diner that once fed half the county. I told them I was calling about filings connected to a brand that used to be my work and now used my family like scaffolding. I did not use the words I wanted to use. I used the ones that opened doors. The person on the line did not sound surprised to hear me. They sounded relieved, the way a paramedic sounds when a pulse returns. They asked for documents I knew how to find and dates I had written on the backs of receipts. They described a process that cares more about signatures than birthdays. When we hung up, I placed the phone on the table upside down, as if the conversation were a warm pan that needed to cool on its own. Through the kitchen window, the light shifted on the lilacs, the river shivered in a breeze. On the courthouse steps across town, the banner would be sagging in the afternoon heat, corners curling. In our basement, the sign that held my name with the steadiness of oak stood where it belonged. People had clapped for a story that fit their appetites. I had made meals for decades for men who asked for extra bacon without saying please. I know the difference between feeding people and being eaten. Today, they tried to serve me the second thing. I swallowed nothing. I pressed my palm against the table's scar where Arthur once dropped a pot and apologized until the kettle whistled him out of words. The wood warmed under my hand like a sleeping animal. My phone lit again with a cascade of new emails, confirmations, forms, the shape of a fight arriving. I read the subject lines and finally exhaled. They said I was forgettable. My phone said otherwise, and for the first time all week I believed the phone. The morning after the courthouse ceremony, the tote bag with its slick new logo still sat on the bench in our hallway like an uninvited guest. I had not touched it again. Arthur slept late, his breath shallow, the kind of rhythm that reminds me how fragile his body has become. I made coffee anyway, because the habit of brewing for two does not leave after 60 years. I tried not to think about the way Mark smiled for cameras while my name disappeared from the banner, but silence has a weight, and the phone on the counter would not stop buzzing with numbers I did not recognize. It was easier to face coffee stains than unanswered calls. By noon, I decided to drive to the church where Ruth, my daughter, spends most of her hours. She is 46, with a voice that can turn a sanctuary into a courtroom. She has always believed in the power of words to save or destroy. As children, Mark chased coins while Ruth carried him. He sought profit, she sought purpose. That difference once felt like balance. Now it felt like two hands tearing cloth in opposite directions. I wanted to hear from her what the family refused to say. When I arrived, the church was buzzing with volunteers preparing for an outreach event. The smell of canned soup and industrial cleaner mixed with the faint trace of candles burned last Sunday. Ruth stood near the front, organizing boxes with the authority of someone who believes work is worship. She hugged parishioners, listened to their troubles, promised prayers and logistics in the same breath. When she finally saw me, her face softened, then tightened. She kissed my cheek, but her eyes darted to the others in the room, as if our conversation was a liability. I have known that look since she was a teenager hiding bad report cards. She asked me to wait in her office. Thought her office was small, with books stacked too deep on the shelves and a framed certificate from seminary hung crooked. The desk carried both scripture and spreadsheets. She closed the door behind us, but not all the way. She leaves it ajar so no one can accuse her of secrecy. That, too, is habit. She sat down and folded her hands. I stayed standing, because I needed the ground under my feet. I saw the banner yesterday, I said. My voice was steady because I had practiced steadiness for decades. I heard the applause. I saw what name was missing. Yours was missing too. But you know which name mattered most. She winced. Mom, it wasn't my event. It was about the future. Mark wants to position the family in a way that erases me. I leaned forward, and you let it happen. She started to protest, but the weight of truth pressed against her lips. She looked away, toward the window where sunlight caught the dust motes like exposed lies. Finally, she whispered, they offered us funding, for the church. Enough to expand the food pantry, to build a youth center. They said it was tied to the relaunch. If I interfered, the deal would fall through. I felt something inside me splinter, not rage, not yet. Something quieter, sharper. So you traded your mother's life for bricks and budgets. Her hands trembled. I thought maybe it wouldn't matter, that you didn't want the spotlight, that maybe letting them have the story would mean more resources for people who need it. They dropped my diner's wooden sign into the metal dumpster behind the courthouse steps, while my son lifted a pair of ribbon-cutting scissors for the cameras, and the crowd clapped as if history belonged to him. I am Verena Caldwell, said the woman who opened that diner when the tiles were chipped and the coffee tasted like patience. For 4 decades, I unlocked the door before dawn, kept the grill hot through blizzards and summer blackouts, and learned the town's birthdays by heart. I retired last year because my hands shook when I poured, not because I stopped knowing what fed people. I stood 3 paces back from the red ribbon and felt the thud of my name going missing. Mark Caldwell, my son, 50, polished as a television anchor and paid to move other people's money, angled his body so the press could catch his best side. He called today a passing of the torch, though no one passed me anything. At his elbow stood Tessa, 47, my daughter-in-law, the kind of woman who could turn a lunch meeting into a product launch. She had arranged the podium flowers, the drone camera, the tray of sugar cookies stamped with a new glossy logo that did not taste like our pancakes. When Tessa caught my eye, she squeezed Mark's arm as if to draw a clean line between the future and the woman, holding on to a past she considered inconvenient. Arthur, my husband of 60 years, 81, and steady only if he concentrated on standing still, leaned into me with the careful weight of a man hiding a storm in his chest. He had trimmed his beard and wore the blazer I kept in tissue paper. He whispered nothing. His mouth held the shape of a thank you pointed at the crowd. Though the thanks did not come from me, the Chamber of Commerce chair announced that the town would soon welcome Caldwell's Classic, a modern concept inspired by the original Dinah. A banner slid down the courthouse banister, clean as a hospital sheet. On it, in neat serif letters, the founding story named my husband and my son, the Caldwell men, as the heart and muscle of a legacy that carried the town through hard times. It said nothing about the woman who made pies at midnight and mopped floors until bleach split the skin on her fingers. I watched people I had poured coffee for, teachers and truckers, and the sheriff who used to sit alone after midnight nod at the plaque as if it were scripture. I felt not anger first but a steady cold, like standing in front of a freezer door that never shuts. I heard the thump behind the stage when the old sign hit metal. The sound made a shape in my ribs I had not felt since the morning the health inspector cited me for a cracked tile, and I had 1 hour to find a fix before breakfast. The sign was oak with paint rubbed thin by years of rain and sun. Arthur carved it the first year, before his hands stiffened. The drop into the dumpster said more clearly than any speech what today meant. It meant the past could be hauled away. With yesterday's cardboard, I walked toward the alley as if I had been asked to collect empty coffee urns. A security volunteer reached out a palm without looking at me. His finger said, "Stop, ma'am," the way a stranger stops traffic for parade. I stepped around him. If there was one expertise I still possessed, it was finding the back door. In the alley, the sun cut a hard angle between brick and asphalt. The lid of the dumpster was thrown open, and the sign stared up like a face that had fallen. Splinters framed the edges where the screws had torn out. I did not climb in. I braced both hands on the rim and reached, a gesture that felt like sewing a hymn without looking at the needle. My fingertips found the groove in the letter C, where a child once traced his name with a quarter, while his mother counted tips. The wood was hot. A pair of crewmen in matching polo shirts argued about lunch breaks. One swiped at his phone. The other kicked a crushed soda can. Neither asked whether I needed help. I decided I did not. I could hear Mark finishing his speech, giving thank yous to lenders and permitting offices and the network that had taken interest in the relaunch. He spoke about a family tradition. He spoke about resilience. I knew without hearing the exact sentences that he positioned the Caldwell men as the spine of the story. Tessa would have fed him those phrases during morning runs and whispered them over emails. She understood narrative the way I understand baka. A few ingredients at the wrong temperature, and the whole thing collapses. Arthur found me in the alley, breath short, hand shaking. He did not scold me for wandering. He put a palm on my back where the bones jut like a ridge and steadied me while I tugged the sign to the lip of the dumpster. He is a man who builds with wood and avoids confrontation. He would rather add a brace under a sagging floor than argue about what made it sag. Today he carried the weight of a secret I could not yet name, and the silence between us had edges as he took a corner of the sign and helped me angle it down without scraping more paint. We did not have a truck. We had a sedan with a trunk meant for groceries. He looked at the back seat as if measuring. Old habits show up when you need them. He folded the seat down, tilted the sign at a diagonal, and sacrificed the upholstery as if leather were a suggestion. The sign fit because we made it fit. Back on the courthouse steps, Mark raised an arm to bring attention to the screen behind the ribbon. A short film played a shimmering montage of family photos selected by someone who values symmetry over truth. There was a shot of Arthur planing a plank from the year we rebuilt the counter after a pipe burst. There was a shot of infant Mark in a high chair I dragged into the office to keep him from crawling underfoot. In the middle, A title card declared a new era founded by vision, with names arranged as neatly as place cards at a gala. Mine was not among them. It was a precise erasure, the kind you do when you know exactly where to cut. The crowd applauded. Strangers took selfies with the banner. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed to the cookies. I felt my phone buzz in my purse with the persistence of a fly. I had silenced it because the new ringtone, Arthur chose a melody from an old show, made him laugh, even when he shouldn't. And today there was nothing funny to be had on those steps. I did not check the screen until the event began to loosen, and people started looking for shade. When I finally pulled the phone out, my hands were still dusty from the dumpster, and the glass smeared with the oil that never entirely leaves a cook's skin. The call log blinked with red numbers that looked like an error. 300 missed calls since Monday, sourced mostly from a number marked unknown, leaving messages marked urgent. Several were spaced 5 minutes apart, entire clusters in the small hours when even my restless mind sleeps. My name sits at the top of our family group text as administrator because I taught myself to set it up when Ruth needed to coordinate volunteers for a food drive. That thread was quiet today, a funerary quiet. The calls were not from them. They were from the outside, the way a storm presses against windows. I put the phone away because the courthouse microphone squealed, and I do not like to miss the moment when something breaks in public. Mark descended the steps into the small crowd and accepted congratulations. Like a man receiving a medal he imagined during childhood, a retired teacher told him she was proud. The sheriff said the town needed a win. A local blogger panned a camera in a slow sweep and framed him like a statue. When Mark reached me, he kissed my cheek quickly for the sake of optics and told me with his eyes to behave. When Tessa hugged me, she pressed hard, the way a person presses stickers onto a glass door to flatten the bubbles, and her perfume was a new kind of sugar that did not belong anywhere near butter. A volunteer from the chamber handed me a canvas tote bag with the new logo on the side and a stack of promotional coasters inside. I took it because women my age take things they did not ask for and make space for them. The coasters were slick and heavy, as if weight could make a lie more convincing. One featured a line about authenticity that made my stomach turn. I set the tote on the courthouse bench beside Arthur and told him with a glance to hold on to it. He held it the way he has held everything I could not drop, with 2 steady hands and a willingness to be the wall I lean against. We drove home by the long route that passes the old diner building, empty now, windows papered, a for-lease sign pale from last winter. The parking lot looked smaller without the morning trucks. A faded grease stain near the back door traced the shape of 1,000. Breakfast. A crow hopped along the roofline and considered its kingdom. I parked at the curb and turned off the engine. Arthur did not ask why we stopped. He is a man who understands pilgrimage. We carried the sign through the side gate, past the lilac bush that refused to die even when snow snapped it to the roots. In the basement, against the wall where I once kept extra coffee filters, the outline of the original sign still showed on the cinder block as a clean rectangle, surrounded by the darker work of years. Arthur slid the wood against that pale outline and stepped back. It fit the space the way a memory fits a body, precise, a little painful. I remembered the years I worked double shifts, keeping the diner open through storms, so children could eat before school. Did she think I built all that just to become a footnote? I saw her struggling with shame, but shame did not return my name to the plaque she had chosen, silence, and silence is not neutral. It sides with power. I am not asking you to burn down your church, I said. I am asking why you would watch them bury me alive. Tears filled her eyes, but tears do not change contracts. She whispered. I didn't know how to stop them. I thought if I stayed close, I could guide the process. I was wrong. She looked at me as if hoping I would forgive her instantly. Forgiveness is not a reflex. It is a decision, and decisions require truth first. Before I could respond, a knock sounded on the half-open door. A parishioner leaned in, asking for Ruth's approval on a delivery. She excused herself with the relief of someone escaping a fire. I stayed in the chair she vacated and stared at the cross on her wall. Symbols mean nothing if people use them to excuse betrayal. When she returned, she carried a binder. She placed it on the desk without meeting my eyes. These are the documents they showed me. Drafts of the sponsorship agreement. I shouldn't let you see them, but I can't carry this alone anymore. Inside were glossy mock-ups of promotional materials. Coldwell's Classic, partnered with the church for community impact. My son's smile beamed from the page. My daughter's congregation stood as backdrop. I was nowhere. I turned the pages slowly, each one a cut. "Do you understand what this means?" I asked. She nodded, silent. I closed the binder and pushed it back. "Then you already know you chose them over me." She tried to grab my hand. "Mom, please, I can still help. I can talk to Mark, to Tessa. Maybe there's room to negotiate." I pulled my hand away. "They do not negotiate with ghosts, and that's what they've made me." I stood, because sitting felt like surrender. "If you want to help, then help. But don't confuse help with excuses." I walked out of the church without saying goodbye. Outside, the sun was too bright, the air too clean. People waved, oblivious. To them, Ruth was the leader, Mark the visionary, Tessa the organizer. I was the shadow of a woman they assumed was content to fade. They did not see the call log in my phone, or the weight of 327 unanswered voices driving home. Arthur was waiting in his chair by the window. He asked how Ruth was, and I told him only that she was busy. He did not press. That is his way, silence where words should be. I looked at him and wondered what silence he was keeping for himself. The house felt crowded with unsaid things. The tote bag still sat on the bench, logo glaring like an accusation. I pushed it into the closet with my foot. That night I lay awake listening to Arthur's uneven breathing. Betrayal has a sound. It is not shouting. It is not slammed doors. It is the quiet shuffle of people you love aligning themselves against you while smiling for photographs. It is your daughter believing your erasure is a small price for her congregation's gain. It is the applause of neighbors who think they are cheering progress when they are applauding a theft. At midnight, I rose and went to the basement. The sign leaned against the wall, oak steady, letters chipped but legible. I placed my hand on the groove of the C and thought of the thousands of meals that had passed beneath it. My phone buzzed again, more calls from that unknown number. I let it buzz. I had decisions to make, but not tonight. Tonight I needed to remember that the sign still existed, that my name was carved in wood, even if it was missing from banners. Tomorrow, I would decide how to make the world see it again. I woke before the sun reached the river and went straight to the basement. The oak sign waited against the wall where it fit like a healed scar. I set a towel on the floor and pulled the plastic bins toward me one by one, the way I used to bring prep trays up from the walk-in before dawn. On the lids I had written years in thick marker, but heat and time had blurred numbers into guesswork. I was looking for anything with my handwriting and a date that could outlast a podium speech. The bin with 1978 cracked at the corner when I pried it open. Inside, a smell of fryer oil and paper rose up like a greeting. I found the old order pads, bound with a rubber band that snapped as soon as I touched it, a reminder that everything breaks when it has done its job. The top sheets carried names of truckers who always asked for extra onions, and the shorthand I invented for a busy Saturday rush. Beneath them, an envelope labeled utilities held receipts folded to a patient crease. At the bottom lay a small, gray cash box with a dent at the hinge. The key was taped to the lid with yellowed tape, and my younger handwriting dared anyone else to touch it. When I opened it, a booklet slid out, the kind banks used to give customers with monthly coupons. The front was stamped with a loan number and our last name. The signature line on the first page did not hold my hand. It held Arthur's alone, in his careful carpenter's script. The box also held a carbon copy of a document I had never seen, dated during the winter we nearly closed after the pipe burst. It named one proprietor, not two. It named a pledge of equipment and fixtures. It named my life by a man's hand. Upstairs, the kettle clicked off and Arthur coughed the way he does when dust gets bold. I went up with the booklet in my fist and set it on the table next to his mug. He recognized it at once. He did not pretend surprise. He sat down as if the chair had been waiting to take the confession. He explained that long ago there had been a shortfall, that he had taken care of it. That he was the one with the credit line and the bank had pushed for a speedier signature. He said the word temporary the way people say the word bridge during a flood. He did not say why temporary had lasted long enough to erase my name from forms strangers would read later. He did not ask what else the booklet contained. He knew. I told him I would be out for a few hours and that the casserole was in the oven if he wanted it by noon. He nodded, grateful for ordinary instructions in a house where the air had turned thick with unasked questions. The tote bag with the new logo sat in the hall like a child who will not stop staring, so I moved it behind the coats to stop its watching. On my way to the car, I circled back to the basement, wrapped the loan booklet in a dish towel. and slid it into my purse next to the cassette from 1998. Documents and voices make a better pair than speeches and balloons. I drove to the edge of town where the Whitmore property begins, past the low pasture and the rusting tractor that no one admits belongs to anyone. Caroline Whitmore, my sister-in-law, 72, sharp as a pane of winter glass, and twice as cold when in the big farmhouse with the porches that sag like tired eyelids. She is Arthur's sister and carries grudges, the way some people carry prayer books. She has not forgiven the day my husband pressed her to sign away a share she believed she deserved during those hungry years, and she has not wasted the time since. She opened her door before I reached the steps, as if she had been standing behind it all morning waiting for the weight of my footsteps. She did not ask why I came. She told me she had watched the footage of the courthouse event on the internet and wondered how it felt to be erased with that much money smiling at you. I told her I was there for anything she kept from those early years that showed who did the work and how. She did not bother with small talk. She led me to the dining room where the table was covered in boxes labeled in tight, neat script. There were photo albums, ledger copies, a stack of flyers from the first summer we stayed open late for the county fair crowd. On top lay a shoebox of letters bound with twine. She said she had saved what others threw out because paper remembers what people find inconvenient. She allowed me to open the albums first. There I was, hair pinned back with a pencil, painting the chalkboard menu because we could not afford new plastic letters. There I was, kneeling on the floor to scrub while Arthur held the mop handle like a baton. A local newspaper clipping named me in the caption as the woman who baked pies that sold out by noon. In a photo from a winter storm, I stood with a shovel while my son sat on a counter drinking cocoa. I did not have time to sip. My name lived in those pages the way yeast lives in dough, quiet, necessary, unseen, until heat rises. Carol watched me turn pages until she seemed sure I understood the value of what sat here. Then she took up the shoebox of letters and set it apart. She said these were not for the general public. They were private correspondences from the period when Arthur pushed her to sign a release of claim on some equipment after their parents died. She said there were drafts in which he wrote that he would record himself at the county office as sole owner if she did not agree. She said my name appeared in those drafts as a helper, not an owner. She asked if I knew my name had been used that way. I told her I did not. She said she believed me because if I had known, I would have fixed it with the same precision I used to fix a cracked pie crust. She stated the price of her help plainly. She wanted her brother named publicly for what he did in those years, not simply corrected in a file, but exposed with words as clear as the ones on the banner that had erased me. She wanted him to feel the heat she had carried under her tongue for decades. She wanted a small town to hear the version of events she says the men had kept to themselves. She said she would lend me the letters if I promised to use them where people listen. She called it fairness. I heard thirst. I did not give her what she wanted. I told her I would carry facts where they needed to go. I told her the truth has its own schedule, and it usually runs late. She did not smile. She slid one letter out and held it where I could read without taking it. In it, Arthur wrote to her about a banker who wanted clean lines on a filing, not joint anything, not complicated histories. He wrote that speed mattered more than precision, and that we would iron it out later. He wrote like a man trying to catch up to a debt that would not stop multiplying. At the bottom he had signed his name with the flourish he uses when he feels important. Beneath it, he had scribbled a note to himself with a date and the words, County Clerk, beside a time I asked to photograph the document. She allowed it, but only after reminding me that a photograph is not possession. I took pictures of the letter, the envelope with its postmark, the stationery header. I took pictures of the public clippings naming my work and the handwritten menus in my block letters. I kept my hands steady because the record requires steadiness. She watched me silently, like an archivist guarding a vault. When I finished, she wrapped the shoebox in a towel and returned it to the cabinet as if resealing a wound. Before I left, she added one more thing. She said a production assistant had reached out to her last week asking for old family photos for a promotional segment. She had declined with the pleasure of a person refusing dessert at a table of gluttons. She said the assistant mentioned the need to establish a clear founding narrative for brand protection. She said she understood what that meant. If a story is tidy, people buy it faster. She told me to decide what I wanted to be to them, an ornament or an obstacle. She assumed I had already chosen. On the drive home, my phone shook in my purse like a trapped bird. I let it, because panic wears itself out if you give it room. At a stoplight, I glanced at the screen. The unknown number had left 3 more messages. In the hour I spent with Carol, the transcripts used phrases like chain of title and verification of rights. There was a request to confirm historical materials and a note about discrepancies between public statements and archival records. I recognized the cadence of legal departments that survive by refusing to assume anything. The world my children had chosen would demand receipts. I have never been afraid of receipts. Back at the house, Arthur was resting in his chair with the afternoon news murmuring like a neighbor in the yard. I set my purse on the table and placed the bank booklet a little closer to him than before. He did not pretend not to see it. He spoke as a man who has decided to stop hiding because the hiding has become heavier than the truth. He told me there had been a winter when we could not meet payroll and he had gone to the bank alone because I was at the diner keeping the grill hot. He said the banker wanted to move quickly and had insisted on one name, one signature, to avoid delays. He said he had told himself that the name did not matter because we were one unit and paperwork was a formality. He said he had planned to fix it later and that later never arrived. He said the loan was paid off, but the filing left a shadow. He said he was sorry in a voice that made him smaller. I listened. I thought about the men cheering at the courthouse, about Ruth's binder, about Carol's shoebox. I thought about the banner that held 2 names, as if a woman's hands had never bled on a counter. I did not burn him to the ground in my kitchen. I told him clarity would be more useful than regret. I asked him for dates, names of people at desks, where he kept the copies he never showed me. He said there was a safety deposit box key taped to the underside of the dresser drawer, a small piece of practical magic he assumed I would appreciate. He said the box held deeds, the last letter from his father, and the original stamped loan documents. He said he wanted me to take them. Evening came in through the windows without asking. I drove to the diner building again because sometimes a person needs to look at an empty space until it fills with intention. The paper on the windows curled at the corners and lifted, showing small triangles of interior air like secret mouths. I pressed my palms to the glass and saw the ghost of our counter in the reflection. I remembered where the pie case stood, where the server bell had hung, the exact place in the tile where a crack mapped a lightning bolt I always meant to fix. I took my phone from my purse and photographed the reflection of my face in the glass with the building behind me. Not for vanity, for record. A person erased must first insist she exists. At home, I opened the drawer and found the key where Arthur said it would be, the tape holding like stubborn skin. I set it next to the cassette and the bank booklet. I wrote a list on an index card: safety deposit box, callback legal number, gather Carol's copies, locate purchase invoices from first 2 years, check state business filings for proprietor designations. I did not write to confront Mark and Tessa. Confrontations like that burn energy without generating light. Paperwork, meanwhile, makes a different kind of fire, the kind that spreads slow and precise and cannot be stomped out with speeches. When I finally checked the latest voicemail from the unknown number, the voice identified itself as a legal affairs coordinator for a media company affiliated with the restaurant group. The person said they had attempted numerous times to reach the individual most closely associated with the original Caldwell's brand for purposes of confirming historical claims and ensuring compliance. They said the materials submitted by my son's office named 2 founders and then, in another set, named 1. They said they needed to reconcile the discrepancy immediately because the company would not proceed without clarity. They asked me to return the call with any documents or recordings that could establish the original scope of ownership and the person who created the menu and service model. They did not ask how my day had gone at the courthouse. They did not praise a ribbon. They asked for proof. I spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table with the index cards, the cassette player, and a stack of files I pulled from the basement bins. I laid out the first month's tally sheets, marked the days we broke even and the days we ate losses. I gathered vendor invoices in my name because I was the one who opened at 4 a.m. to receive deliveries. I found a photocopy of the original menu in my handwriting with my initials in the corner because I wrote menus the way I wrote grocery lists, with initials to remind myself who did the work. I organized it the way I organized morning prep: left to right, hot to cold, oldest to newest. Arthur fell asleep in his chair and woke with a start at midnight, then shuffled to bed, the house creaking under his careful steps. I stacked what would be needed when the banker's office opened, when a legal department picked up the phone. Before I turned off the light, I placed the oak sign's smallest chipped letter, one that had broken loose from the edge years ago, and that I had kept in the junk drawer on top of the pile. If anyone in a suit asked what this fight was about, I would point to that flake of paint and wood and let it speak. 327 missed calls had not been pleas for a mother's attention. They had been the sound of a machine realizing it had eaten a woman's name and could not swallow. Tomorrow I would return the call and tell the machine what I had fed a town for 40 years and whose hands had done the serving. The morning after I photographed Carol's letters, I drove to the center of town with a list in my pocket and the safety deposit key pressed cold against my palm. The bank had not changed its bricks since the year Nixon resigned. Its clock still ticked above the doorway, though no one trusted its hands. I parked where I used to park when dropping off payroll envelopes on Mondays, back when the diner's kitchen smelled like bacon grease by dawn. The sidewalk was busy with schoolchildren and office clerks, who did not recognize me as the woman who had served their parents' first cups of coffee. To them, I was another old face with errands. Inside, the air carried the smell of carpet cleaned too late and coffee brewed too long. Behind the counter stood Mr. Keating, the bank's manager. He is in his early 60s now, a man with a voice that was once smooth enough to sell loans to young couples but is rougher now, gravel softened with politeness. He greeted me with a smile that said he remembered the pies I used to bring in every Christmas. His hair was grayer, but his memory was sharp. He called me Mrs. Caldwell, the way men who handle documents always do, as if formality can shield them from consequence. I told him I needed access to the Caldwell box, and I slid the key across the counter. His eyes flickered, recognition of a history he had helped shape. He asked me to follow. We walked through the steel door to the small room where boxers sit, in slots like books no one reads. The walls hummed with the sound of cooling systems and fluorescent lights. He placed the long metal drawer on the table and left me to open it alone, but he did not move far. His shadow lingered through the window. I opened the box and found exactly what Arthur had promised. Deeds to our home. His father's last letter folded into an envelope so brittle it might crumble, and the loan documents stamped by the county clerk. The first page carried the bank's letterhead, the amount, and Arthur's name alone, clear as neon. It carried the date of the winter, when pipes froze and payroll nearly sank us. My name did not appear, not even as It was as if the state believed I had not existed at all. I copied down every detail on index cards, then asked Keating to join me in the room. He hesitated before stepping inside, the way a man enters a confessional he does not want. I held up the document and asked if he had been involved in its preparation. He nodded slowly, then adjusted his tie, though no one was watching. He admitted he was still a junior officer then, but he had delivered the papers. He remembered the urgency, the frozen pipes, the payroll. He remembered Arthur coming in without me. He remembered the directive from above. Keep it clean, keep it fast, one signature. He told me it was not unusual in those days to move things along that way. He said it like a man rehearsing a defense he had told himself for decades. I asked him if he had ever considered what it meant to erase the hand that opened the diner every day at 4 a.m., the hand that signed checks to suppliers, the hand that held the spatula through fevers and funerals. He shifted his weight, because the walls of that room do not allow evasion. He said he did what his boss told him, that he never thought that detail would matter 40 years later. I told him it mattered then, it matters now, it will matter long after we both are gone. He lowered his head. In that moment, the authority of a banker dissolved and left only a man who had moved a pen across a counter without thinking who it might cut. I asked for copies. He hesitated, then explained that only an account holder could request certified duplicates. Arthur's name meant Arthur's consent. I told him Arthur had given me the key and the truth. He weighed my words the way men in power always weigh the risk of letting a woman speak. He finally said he would prepare them but would need Arthur's signature for release. He promised nothing else. His eyes carried pity, and pity is worse than refusal because it assumes you are weak. I told him to keep his pity and save me the paperwork. As I left the vault, the phones at the teller desk rang with the sound of other people's debts. I stepped outside and sat in my car with the copies of my notes. The courthouse event replayed in my mind, the crowd cheering under the banner with my name erased. I realized the weight of the bank's stamp. It had given Mark and Tessa the leverage they needed to claim sole rights in their contracts. A banker's quick pen had built the foundation of my erasure. long before my children ever learned how to spell their names. Driving home, I passed the diner building again. A truck was parked outside with men unloading lighting equipment. A sign taped to the door announced filming scheduled for the following week. My son's dream, my nightmare, now wore the gloss of production. I parked across the street and watched as a woman in a headset directed the workers. She carried a clipboard listing shots to be taken. I caught sight of the heading, Founders Segment. She spoke the words as she directed cameras toward the exterior. The words crawled into my bones like cold. When I entered the house, Arthur was napping in his chair again. I placed the banknotes in front of him when he woke. His face folded as he read. He admitted he had signed without telling me because he thought it was temporary. He admitted he had never fixed it. He apologized again, but apologies cannot rewrite documents. I told him the bank would require his signature for copies. He said he would give it. He said he owed me that. I did not tell him it was more than me. He owed every customer who had ever signed a check to Caldwell's diner, believing a woman's name stood behind it. That night, I returned to the basement. I dug deeper through bins, pulling out vendor invoices in my handwriting, menus written on napkins during shortages, even the tally sheet where I had calculated break-even points with coffee stains blurring the ink. Each paper carried the ghost of my hand. Together they formed a record stronger than the banker's stamp, because they carried the texture of lived hours. I arranged them in stacks like ammunition, because truth must be armed to be believed. The phone rang again with the unknown number. I did not answer. I let it echo through the kitchen like a bell warning of a storm. I poured tea and sat with the oak sign beside me, the one piece no contract could erase. Its chipped paint caught the lamplight, and I traced the letters with my finger. They said I was forgettable, but 327 missed calls told me otherwise. They were not chasing me to share affection. They were chasing me because the foundation of their empire had a crack. And they knew the woman they had tried to bury still held the shovel that could dig it wide open. I went to bed with papers stacked on the nightstand, the loan booklet folded beside them, the cassette player waiting. Sleep came slow, but when it did, it carried the steady knowledge that the next battle would not be in kitchens or pews. It would be in banks and offices, with signatures and stamps. They thought the past was buried. I had just seen it breathing. Certified envelope arrived before breakfast, thick as a grudge and stamped with the kind of urgency that makes neighbors peer through curtains. Arthur was still in his robe, reaching for the kettle. When I slit it open with the paring knife I keep sharper than my patience. Inside lay a letter wrapped in law firm confidence, informing me that effective immediately I was to cease using the Caldwell name in any public statement, presentation, or media interaction, and that any claim of founding or authorship attached to that name would be treated as interference. The words arranged themselves like a barricade. You do not exist. If you insist, we will bill you for trying. I set the letter on the counter beside the index cards I had organized the night before and watched steam rise from the kettle, as if it could fog the threat into something less precise. It did not. By 9, I had called the legal clinic that runs out of our county library twice a week and asked for an appointment. That clinic saved the auto shop down the road during a zoning mess. I trusted people who fix things quietly. They told me to come at 11. I placed the cease and desist in a folder with the banknotes, Carol's photographed letters, vendor invoices in my name, a photocopy of the original menu in my hand, and the cassette labeled 1998 with the case taped at the corner. I left Arthur with lunch instructions, tucked the safety deposit key into my purse as if it were a passport, and drove to the library where I once took Ruth for story hour. On the second floor near the genealogy tables, a cluster of folding chairs circled a whiteboard. A young woman in a navy blazer stood at the front, addressing a small crowd about small business records. Her voice steady, her notes colored. When she finished, she stepped aside and began speaking to people, one-on-one. This was Janelle Ortiz, 32, a legal aid attorney who works pro bono on intellectual property and consumer matters. She carries a notebook bristling with neon tabs and a patience that makes people straighten their shoulders. When my turn came, I introduced myself and placed my folder on the table without preamble. She read the cease and desist, the bank copies, the menu, the invoices, the letter from the media company asking to confirm history. Her eyes sharpened with each page. She asked exact questions. First use of the Caldwell name in commerce, who designed the menu, who sourced vendors, whether I had flyers dating back to our opening summer, whether the town paper ever printed a caption naming me. I pointed to the photocopies, she explained, in words that did not try to impress. That a name can belong to you by use before it belongs to you by registration. That the law recognizes the origin of a brand even when paperwork fails, and that misrepresentation in promotion can be challenged. She used the word preserve 3 times: preserve recordings, preserve written materials, preserve electronic evidence. She said the letter I received was an attempt to frighten me into silence while they built a public narrative. She did not promise outcomes, she promised process. She said we would begin by sending notice to the media company and the restaurant group that there was a dispute about the story they planned to sell. She said we would request that they hold all materials connected to the relaunch, including emails and drafts, because destroying them after notice could be its own problem. She nodded at the cassette. Voices matter, she said, and it sounded like a fact, not comfort. I told her about the filming notice taped to the diner door and the schedule for a founder's segment. She asked if I had photographed the posting. I had. She added it to the stack, then asked whether I could identify former employees or suppliers who would attest to my role. I named 3, all still in town. Men and women who know exactly who made the pies and who negotiated the egg prices every Easter. She wrote their names with times next to them. Then she asked about Carol's letters. I told her Carol would not part with originals but allowed photographs. Janelle said photographs would do for now. When our hour ended, she gave me a checklist. Gather receipts with my name from our first 2 years. Obtain copies of newspaper clippings with captions naming me. Visit the county clerk to pull any doing business's filings, and return to the bank with Arthur to request certified copies. She would draft 2 letters, one to the media company asking them to pause use of founding claims pending verification, and one to the restaurant group warning them that the history they were selling had holes. She also suggested I record a short statement on a fresh cassette or phone, identifying myself and the years I operated, because sometimes the simplest proof is the most difficult to ignore. Before I left, she wrote her cell number on the back of her card and told me not to argue with family on email or text. She said public speech will come later, when facts stand in a row. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and warm paper. I drove straight to the clerk's office, a low building with floors that have survived entire generations of sneakers. The clerk pulled microfiche for the late 70s and early 80s. And together we scrolled through filings the way fishermen watch a line, patient, quick-eye. There was no DBA naming Caldwell's until the year after we opened, and when it finally appeared, it listed Arthur Caldwell, no proprietor, but the town paper that same year ran a small column about the diner that named me as the woman whose pies changed minds. I paid for certified copies of the column and the filing. I asked the clerk to certify the absence of earlier filings. She shrugged but gave me a printout that showed nothing before that date. Nothing is not empty when it says what is missing. At the bank, Mr. Keating had the copies ready. Arthur had signed the request with ink that bled through the paper like a bruise. Keating gave me a look men reserve for funerals and bad weather. He offered a quiet apology that did not erase ink. I took the certified copies and thanked him with a voice that did not shake. In the parking lot, I called Janelle. She asked me to scan everything and send it to a secure folder. She told me to drop by her office at 5. She would have the letters ready. I stopped at a copy shop and scanned each page, watching the bar of light move across my history as if it were checking 1,000 tiny signatures. On my way home, I detoured past the diner. The crew had set up a camera on a dolly. A woman with a headset arranged a shot that looked toward the door where we used to hang the day's soup sign. A man in a branded jacket rehearsed lines to an unseen interviewer about how his father had taught him that a hot grill is the heart of a community. They brought in an actress to stand at the register, an older woman in an apron with hair pinned the way mine used to be when the morning rush demanded speed. She handled fake bills while smiling at the camera for a reenactment. I watched from my car, with the window down and the cassette in my hand, the plastic warm from sitting on the passenger seat. There is a peculiar sensation when your life becomes a set. It is like smelling a familiar spice in a room where no cooking is done. I lifted my phone and recorded 30 seconds, not to post, to keep at home. Arthur sat with the afternoon news muted. I told him where I had been and what came next. He nodded, grateful there was a next. I asked him to come with me to Janelle's office. He changed into a clean shirt without complaint. We drove into town, two old people in a car heavy with paper, a small army traveling in a sedan. Janelle's office sits on the second floor of a building that used to be a stationery shop. The hall still smells faintly of glue and dust. She greeted us with a firm handshake and introduced herself to Arthur with the steady respect you give a person whose mistake will become part of the record. She explained what she planned to send. That evening, a notice to the media company requesting a hold on any content calling Mark and Arthur founders, a demand for confirmation of historical claims, a preservation notice to my son's office requiring them to keep all drafts, emails, footage, and internal messages about Caldwell's history, and a letter to the restaurant group advising them that unauthorized use of Caldwell's attached to a false narrative may constitute misrepresentation. She did not raise her voice or make threats. She wrote facts in a line so straight, it made breathing easier. She asked Arthur to sign a declaration stating the circumstances of the loan, acknowledging that the one-signature rush caused a paperwork trail that did not reflect reality. She wrote it in plain English and read it aloud before sliding it over. He signed. His hand shook. When he finished, he looked younger, the way people do when a weight is finally named and put on a scale. She asked me to sign a declaration as well, affirming the materials and dates, the menu in my hand, the vendor invoices addressed to me, the recorded tapes made nightly over 2 decades summarizing operations. I signed and handed over the photographs, from Carol, which Janelle labeled Exhibit C, noting that originals remain in family possession. Janelle photocopied the certified newspaper column, naming me while the copier hummed like an old acquaintance. Her last instruction was unexpected. She told me to take the oak sign to a safe place outside my house and photograph it with the day's newspaper next to it to create a time-stamped record of possession. People become brave when money enters a room, she said. Sometimes bravery looks like theft. I thought of the courthouse dumpster. I thought of the headset woman filming an actress to play me. We left Janelle's office with copies, instructions, and a promise that the letters would be delivered by 8. On the way home, I drove to the storage unit we used years ago when Ruth came back from college with furniture she did not keep. The manager remembered me. He used to eat pancakes at our counter after night shift. He rented me a small, climate-controlled unit without asking why an old woman needed a space big enough for a sign. Arthur and I slid the oak into place and leaned it against the wall. I placed today's newspaper at its base, took photos from 3 angles, then stood back and looked. The sign did not say please. It said already. At dusk, an email from Janelle arrived with PDFs of the letters and delivery confirmations. The media company replied with an automated acknowledgement and a promise to escalate. The restaurant group's general counsel wrote 2 lines stating they would review and respond. Mark's office address pinged as delivered. The preservation notice had landed in his inbox and at his assistant's desk. For the first time since the ribbon cut the air in front of the courthouse, I felt the shape of a counterpressure. I spent the evening on the phone with 2 former employees who agreed to sign statements tomorrow. One had trained under me to run the grill when my hands began to tremble. The other had carried the overnight ledger to the bank each Friday with my initials on the flap. They did not speak about loyalty. They spoke about facts: who closed, who ordered, who stood at the register when the till came up short and found the mistake. The truck driver who used to leave extra 5s promised to dig out the photo of me serving his father on the morning of the blizzard. People remember where they eat. People remember who feeds them, even if a banner forgets. Near midnight, I set my phone on the kitchen table and pressed record. I said my name in the years I opened the door, the winter the pipe burst, the day the school bus broke down and our booths became classrooms. I listed daily rituals: coffee on at 4:30, pies out at 10, the lunch rush that hit like church bells. I described the chalkboard and the way my hand cramped if I wrote too long without shaking it out. I repeated the name of the diner, the way I had said it answering the phone for 4 decades. My voice on the recording did not quaver. I finished by stating plainly that any representation of Caldwell's that deletes me is a lie. Arthur listened from the doorway, nodding once as if counting something only he could see. He took the safety deposit key from the table and placed it in my palm, closing my fingers over it as if to say, finally, here. I put it back in my purse with the cassette and the certified copies and the letter that had tried to scare me silent. The house felt different, not safer, not louder, just aligned. The sign sat in a storage unit under a fluorescent light. Alive in a way wood is alive when it has been touched by decades of hands. Before I turned off the kitchen light, I checked my voicemail one more time. The unknown number had left a final message for the day. They had received a communication from council representing a party with historical connection to the Caldwell brand and would pause certain promotional materials pending verification. Their voice was formal, but I heard the strain beneath it. A machine had begun to slow. I washed the paring knife and slid it back into its drawer, sharp and quiet. They said I was forgettable. My phone, my files, my name on cassette tape disagreed. Out loud, I first realized something was wrong when I found the appointment card tucked under my teapot. It bore the logo of Rosewood Senior Living, a facility an hour outside of town, and a date for a family consultation. The handwriting on the card was Mark's, neat and assertive. He had left it where he knew I would see it, without daring to hand it to me. I read it twice before the meaning settled. They were preparing to take me out of my own house, to box me into quiet halls where my words could be filed under difficult resident, until I no longer threatened their storyline. Evening. Arthur stirred his soup, but didn't lift the spoon. When I held up the card, he sighed without surprise. His silence was consent. Perhaps he believed I would be safer in a place with nurses and routines, but I saw it for what it was: removal. They wanted me erased not by law, not by letters, but by walls. 2 days later, Mark and Tessa arrived, dressed as if for a board meeting rather than a family visit. Tessa carried a leather folder, and Mark had his smile fixed in the way he does when closing a deal. They did not ask how I felt. They announced, "Mom, we've arranged a transition plan," Tessa began, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. It showed sunlit lounges, elderly couples laughing over puzzles. Rosewood offers everything you need: activities, healthcare, companionship. You'll be free of the stress of managing things here. I asked, free or gagged. My voice did not tremble. Mark leaned forward, hands clasped. "Mom, it's not about silencing you. It's about ensuring you're cared for." With the dispute ongoing, this house is complicated. At Rosewood, you'll have security. Complicated. That was his word for my existence. Arthur cleared his throat, murmuring something about medical monitoring. Tessa cut him off smoothly. "We've already spoken with administration. They'll prepare a suite. All you need to do is pack what matters." She smiled as if she had just solved an inconvenience. I stared at her folder, knowing inside it lay documents with boxers already ticked. She had anticipated resistance, but she also knew most people at 78 do not marshal the strength to fight logistics. She counted on fatigue. She did not count on me. That night I did not sleep. I walked the rooms of my house, touching the walls, the frames, the drawer handles worn by decades of daily reach. I went down to the basement, where the diner's relics slept: the oak sign, the chalkboard, the boxes of menus, the tapes. These things did not laugh over puzzles in staged photographs. They carried grease stains, fingerprints, the real grit of living. I sat among them until dawn, listening to the silence they held like breath. The next morning, Ruth visited. My daughter, the minister, entered with her Bible under her arm and careful words on her lips. She had heard of the plan and came to ease me into it. "Mother," she said, "it might not be so terrible. A place like Rosewood can be a blessing. You'll have company, care, less weight on your shoulders." I looked at her, my Ruth who once cried when she dropped a tray of dishes at the diner, thinking she had ruined everything. I told her plainly, "It's not care thereafter, it's my silence." Her eyes flickered, because she knew I spoke truth, but she pressed on, speaking of community, of how the church often visits the elderly at Rosewood, of how it could be seen as a step toward peace. And then, almost too quickly, she added, "They've promised the church a grant for repairs if this transition goes smoothly." There it was, the tether. My daughter, a woman of faith, bound by an offer she could not refuse. She lowered her gaze and asked forgiveness without saying the word. I told her forgiveness would come when she remembered who raised her, who stood at the griddle at 5 every morning so she could have her first pair of shoes without holes. Her hands shook on the Bible, but she said nothing more. Later that week, the consultation at Rosewood was scheduled. I went, because refusal would be written as incompetence. The facility gleamed with polished floors and manufactured cheer. Administrators in pastel suits led us down corridors, pointing out craft rooms, exercise classes, a garden that smelled of chemicals rather than earth. They spoke to Mark and Tessa, not to me. outlining costs, schedules, and communication policies. One phrase lodged in my ear: residence. Public statements are managed through family channels to ensure dignity and avoid confusion. Avoid confusion. That meant gag orders dressed as kindness. I asked directly, if I want to give an interview about my diner, may I? The administrator smiled with teeth too white. Mrs. Caldwell, here we focus on wellness. External engagements are discouraged, but your family can speak for you. My family, the same family who had rewritten me out of existence. I walked the hall, pausing at a door ajar. Inside, an elderly woman sat staring at a muted television, her hair combed back by someone else's hand, her expression dulled by absence. On her nightstand sat a framed photograph of her with grandchildren, their faces young, hers vibrant. That picture looked alive. The woman in the chair looked filed away. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, but with rage. Back at the administrator's desk, Mark asked what date could be set for Marvin. I interrupted. None. Not while I can still walk through my own doorway. Tessa opened her folder, ready to counter with power of attorney paperwork, but I spoke first. If you file anything without my consent, you will face legal notice. I have counsel now. Their surprise was genuine. Mark's polished calm cracked. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. I leaned across the desk, looking him in the eyes that once looked up to me as he recited his spelling words. You already made it hard when you decided I was easier erased than remembered. We left in silence. The ride home was thick with it. Arthur muttered once about safety, but I cut him off. Safety is not the same as silence. That evening I called Janelle, my attorney. I explained what had happened. She did not sound surprised. It's a common tactic, she said. Institutionalize the inconvenient party, then declare them unfit to testify. She instructed me to record every conversation, keep copies of every document, and inform the facility in writing that I do not consent to any admission. She also said something else. If they try again, we'll turn it into evidence of coercion. So I wrote a letter that night, dated and signed, declaring my refusal to move to Rosewood and my awareness of the attempt to silence me. I sealed copies in 3 envelopes, one in my dresser, one in the safety deposit box, one mailed to Janelle. The next day, Mark returned alone. Perhaps believing he could reason without Tessa's sharp edge, he brought flowers, lilies that reeked of funerals. He spoke of stress, of wanting what was best. I listened, then asked, is best defined by whose memory survives, yours or mine? He had no answer. He left the flowers on the porch, where they browned by nightfall. Days blurred, but the attempt had left its mark. They had shown me the depth of their resolve. Not content to steal my name, they would cage me until my story suffocated. But I was not suffocating. I was breathing fire into every page, every tape, every scrap of evidence I still possessed. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the old order book, running my fingers over the indentations of graphite where customers had signed their names beside meals long eaten. I thought of those signatures as witnesses, a jury that could not be bribed. Outside, headlights slowed before the housemarque's car. I did not open the door. He waited, then drove off. I knew he would return, with papers, with pressure. But I also knew this. I would meet him not as a confused resident in a pastel chair, but as the woman who built a diner brick by brick and remembered every nail. They said I was forgettable. They wanted walls to prove it. But my voice still traveled across tapes. My handwriting lived in ledgers. My name existed on lips in this town that had eaten at my counter. And as long as I drew breath in my own house, no brochure could silence me. But the first time the phone rang that week, I ignored it. The second, I let it ring until the silence returned. By the 10th, I started keeping count. By the time I scrolled through my call log and saw the number 327 missed calls, I felt the cold weight of panic settle into my chest. For a moment, I allowed myself the foolish thought, maybe Mark, maybe Ruth, maybe even Tessa had been trying to reach me in some storm of guilt. But the area code was strange, not Pennsylvania, not New York, not anywhere I recognized. Whoever had been calling was not family. Whoever it was had been desperate to reach me. And desperate people rarely bring comfort. I waited until Arthur was asleep in his chair before I dialed the number back. The line clicked and then went hollow, as if I'd stepped into a large, empty hall. A man's voice answered, low, clipped, professional. Mrs. Caldwell. He didn't ask who I was. He knew. My name is Daniel Moore. I represent the acquisitions department of Horizon Entertainment, in partnership with Titan Foods. I had heard both names. Horizon churned out those glossy reality shows where people fought over kitchens and recipes. Titan was the fast food chain plastered along highways across the country. The man paused, waiting for me to recognize the weight of his words. I said nothing. We've been trying to reach you, he continued. There's been an irregularity with the contract signed by your son, Mark Caldwell, and his wife. As a matter of legal compliance, we need to verify your position as founder of Caldwell's Diner. Their paperwork omits you entirely. Omission. Such a neat word for erasure. I clenched the receiver. Why, 300 calls? I asked. Thought his tone shifted from professional to uneasy. Because if we proceeded without your acknowledgement, and the fraud surfaced later, our company would be liable for millions. Your son assured us you were forgetful, incapacitated even. But the inconsistencies in the historical record suggest otherwise. I laughed, a sound so sharp it startled even me. Forgetful. They built their empire on my memory. Moore cleared his throat. Mrs. Caldwell, I can't advise you on family matters, but I will say this. Horizon cannot move forward unless this omission is resolved. And Titan is not pleased to find themselves entangled in misrepresentation. You may be more necessary than they realize. Necessary. The word pulsed through me. For months, they had schemed to render me silent, useless, tucked away, yet here was proof that their greed had backfired. Their empire required the very woman they sought to bury. I agreed to meet Moore in person. Not at my home, never there, but at the public library downtown, among rows of books and witnesses. He arrived in a slate suit, carrying a folder swollen with documents. His handshake was firm, but his eyes betrayed tension. Double quotes, Mrs. Caldwell. The problem is simple, he said, sliding the folder open. Inside were contracts with signatures, Mark's, Tessa's, even Arthur's, scrawled hand from decades ago on the old loan. My name was nowhere. Your son claims the diner was his venture, funded and developed by him. But customer testimonials, newspaper clippings, even the diner's incorporation history mention you. There are gaps he cannot explain. I flipped through the papers. Page after page stripped me out like a ghost. Yet in the margins of my mind, I recalled the tapes downstairs, the ones where I recorded recipes in my own voice for the girls who trained under me, the ledger with notes in my hand, the calendar marked with payroll dates. They could not be erased so easily. What happens if I refuse to cooperate? I asked. Moore's jaw tightened. Then, Horizon sues your son for fraud, and Titan pulls out. It will destroy him, perhaps bankrupt him. But if you acknowledge your role quietly, sign off on a revised narrative, everyone walks away whole, quietly. Revised narrative. It was no different from Tessa's brochure at Rosewood. They all wanted silence, dressed in fine language. I won't sign away my life, I said flatly. Not to you, not to them. For the first time, Moore seemed almost relieved. Then, Mrs. Caldwell, I suggest you prepare. They will come harder now. They know the deal hangs on you. And they did. That night, Mark stormed through my door without knocking, his face flushed with fury. What the hell did you tell them? His voice shook the walls. Arthur shuffled in behind him, looking stricken. I told them the truth, I said. Truth, Mark laughed bitterly. You don't understand what you've done. This was our Chancellor family's chance to put Caldwell's on the map, to build something that lasts. I rose from my chair, my knees stiff but steady. It already lasted, Mark. 40 years of sweat and grease, and dawns before daylight. It lasted in every face that walked through those doors hungry and left fed. What you're building isn't a legacy, it's theft. He slammed his fist on the table. You'll regret this. Arthur tried to speak, to calm him, but Mark turned on his father. You signed a loan, Dad. You know the risk we took. You're in this too. Arthur's shoulders sagged, guilt weighing him down. He whispered, I didn't know they'd cut her out. But I did not flinch. Both of you knew. You just thought I'd be too old, too weak to matter. Mark left without another word, but not before throwing a glance sharp enough to slice. I knew then the battle had shifted. I was no longer merely resisting erasure. I was holding the lever that could topple everything he had built. The calls from Horizon continued. More measured now, their desperation cloaked in diplomacy. But beneath it, I heard the ticking clock. Mark and Tessa would scramble, scheme, and strike back harder. They would try again to shut me away, to drag me to Rosewood, to paint me as delusional, yet each move revealed their fear. One evening, alone at the kitchen table, I spread out the old order book, the cassette tapes, the photographs. I pressed the play button on one tape, and my younger voice filled the room, brisk and tired. 2 eggs, over easy. Toast on the side, no onions in the hash. Remember that he's allergic. I closed my eyes. That was me. That was memory, labor, life, undeniable. They said I was forgettable. They built contracts on that lie. But 327 calls proved otherwise. My absence was the hole that made their empire collapse. And for the first time in months, I felt not just rage, but a sharp, quiet satisfaction. They had tried to bury me, and instead, they had made me indispensable. Now the question was no longer if I would fight, it was how hard. When I walked into the hearing room that morning, the air felt sharpened with expectation. Mark and Tessa were already seated at the long table, their attorneys flanking them like loyal dogs. Arthur sat off to the side, shrinking into himself, as if the weight of all those decades pressed him lower in his chair. Ruth had chosen a spot near the back, her clerical collar still visible above her coat, her face unreadable. And at the head of the room, Horizon's representatives more, included shuffled papers and whispered to each other, watching me, as though I were both the problem and the solution. I carried no briefcase, no stack of contracts, just a shoebox, wrapped in string. When I set it down on the table before me, its thud echoed louder than Mark's expensive binder. He smirked, leaning back, his voice carrying across the table. Really, Mom? A box? This is business, not story hour. I met his eyes. Exactly. And this is the business you've forgotten. Moore cleared his throat, trying to maintain order. Mrs. Caldwell, we're here to clarify the chain of ownership. Horizon and Titan both require clear rights before production can proceed. The documents submitted thus far leave uncertainties. A polite way to describe lies. I pulled open the shoebox. Inside, stacked neatly, were cassette tapes labeled with dates in my handwriting. Faded, yes, but still legible. Alongside them, the old order book, its leather cracked, its pages yellowed and dense with names, notes, and shifts. And beneath it all, photographs, employees posing with aprons, regular customers celebrating birthdays, snapshots of me at the counter, pen in hand. These, I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled, are not just mementos, they are records, proof. Intellectual property created and maintained by me. Every recipe, every instruction, every shift logged in my hand. You want history? It's here. Tessa leaned forward, her smile tight and poisonous. You can't be serious. Old tapes and scribbles. That isn't legal proof. It's sentimental clutter. But Moore wasn't smiling. He picked up one tape, studied it, then asked, what's recorded here? I pressed the portable player I'd brought, a hiss of static, then my own voice from decades past, brisk and certain. Add a pinch of paprika. No more, she complains, if it's too strong. 2 burgers medium, 1 rare. Remember, no onions for Mr. Decker. He's allergic. Mark, if you're listening, stop sneaking fries before the rush. Customers come first. The room went still. My voice, younger but unmistakably mine, filled the space. My authority, my labor, captured in magnetic tape. I looked directly at the executives. That is a system, my system. Intellectual work, recorded and applied. Every staff member trained by these tapes, every dollar earned from following them. You call it clutter. I call it authorship. Mark flushed, anger burning under his collar. This is a stunt. Nothing admissible. Mom, you're embarrassing yourself. But Moore shook his head slowly. Actually, Mr. Caldwell, oral records of business practices, contemporaneously recorded, can carry significant weight, especially when corroborated by written ledgers and third-party witnesses. He tapped the order book. These signatures, customers, employees tied directly to her voice. This isn't clutter. This is evidence. Tessa snapped. Evidence of what? That she worked there. Everyone knows she worked there. But the diner survived because Mark managed the finances, because we scaled the idea. That's the difference between a cook and a visionary. I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. Visionary. I saw every customer who came in hungry and left with more than a plate. They left with belonging. You can't package that into a franchise. You can't sign it away. And you can't erase the one who built it. Arthur stirred at last, his voice hoarse. She's right. He looked at the executives, then at Mark. We borrowed on my name, but it was her sweat, her hours. Without her, there's nothing to sell. Mark's head snapped toward him. Don't you dare undermine me now. But Arthur sagged, defeated. I already did, years ago, when I signed that paper, and I've regretted it ever since. I opened the order book to a page halfway through. My own handwriting, payroll Ruth cover Wednesday, Mark absent again, names, shifts, wages, ink that had not faded even if their loyalty had. This is authorship, and it's mine. Moore's expression shifted from skepticism to certainty. He turned to the board. Gentlemen, without Mrs. Caldwell's acknowledgement, Horizon cannot proceed. And given this material, Titan risks exposure if they ignore her. We have no choice but to renegotiate. Mark slammed his hand against the table. You're letting her kill everything we've built. No, I said calmly, I'm letting the truth kill your lies. Tessa's mask finally cracked, her fury breaking through. You wanted her forgotten, Mark. You told me she'd be out of the way, and now look, she's dragged us back to the gutter with her relics. The room rippled with whispers. Ruth finally stood, her voice trembling but clear. These relics fed a town. They paid for my schooling, Mark. They gave us everything. Stop pretending otherwise. He spun toward her, betrayed. You're siding with her. But Ruth didn't flinch. She only folded her arms. Steady now. I'm siding with the truth. I closed the shoebox, satisfied. For weeks I'd been fighting not to be erased, but now, in this sterile corporate room, it was their empire that looked fragile, ready to crumble. They had called me forgettable. They had written me out. But my voice, preserved on those cassettes, had become the one thing they could not silence. As I gathered my things, I spoke to no one in particular, but loud enough for all to hear. You wanted me invisible. Instead, you've made me unforgettable. The look on Mark's face told me what I already knew. The balance had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting for memory. I was winning. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, without the thunderstorm my children might have expected. Horizon called for a final session, and the conference hall was full of executives, lawyers, family, townspeople who had once filled my diner booths. Cameras lined the back wall. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore. It was a stage, and for once, I had chosen to stand at the center of it. Mark sat stiff, jaw tight, as if bracing for impact. Tessa wore her practiced smile, the one she used when she thought charm could undo damage. Ruth's seat was empty at first, and for a moment, my chest tightened, fearing she had chosen absence over truth. But then I saw her slip in from the side door, her clerical collar exposed like a badge. She nodded at me, the smallest gesture, but one I had waited years to see. Moore spoke first, laying out the findings, based on Mrs. Caldwell's recordings, ledgers, and corroborating testimony. Horizon recognizes her as the rightful originator of the Caldwell diner system. Production cannot proceed under Mark Caldwell's signature alone. Titan's earlier contract is voided. The gasp that rolled through the room was almost satisfying enough. Almost. Mark surged to his feet, red-faced. You're destroying everything. Do you understand that, without me, without Tessa, the brand dies? All her tapes won't buy her a legacy. I looked at him steadily. I don't need a brand. I already have a legacy. You tried to bury it, but it was never yours to take. Tessa lashed out, her composure cracking. You senile old woman, you've ruined us. Do you think people will line up for your nostalgia when the world wants franchises? Do you think sentiment pays bills? I let the silence after her words linger until the weight of them soured in the air. Then I opened the order book to the last page, one Ruth had signed when she was 16. This isn't sentiment. It's labor, memory, community. You sold a shell, and now the shell is cracking. Ruth stepped forward, finally finding her voice. Mother fed this town. She made strangers into neighbors. You too fed only your ambition. I won't stand with it anymore. Her words landed, heavy, and the murmur of agreement from the crowd behind her broke the last of Mark's facade. Moore concluded the session with formalities, but the decision was clear. Mark and Tessa had no claim. Their empire dissolved before it had begun. Horizon shifted their attention to me, cautious but respectful. For once, I wasn't being asked to step aside. When it was over, the cameras followed me out. Reporters wanted sound bites, locals wanted handshakes. I walked past them all, Not because I didn't care, but because this victory wasn't meant for headlines. It was meant for memory. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the shoebox, the order book, and a tape playing softly in the background. Arthur had gone to bed early, weak from the day's tension. Ruth stopped by briefly, said she'd be back tomorrow. I believed her this time. I pressed my fingers to the pages. The ink ridged under my skin. The voices of the past spilled from the cassette player, me younger, barking orders with energy I no longer had, but with conviction that had never left. And, as the tape clicked to an end, I finally understood the journey. For months, I thought the worst pain was being forgotten, but it wasn't. The real wound was watching those I-rays try to steal the story I had written with my hands. It wasn't neglect, it was erasure. That is a cruelty age teaches you to fear, not that they will leave you behind, but that they will rewrite the world as if you were never there. What I've learned is this: silence feeds erasure. I spent years swallowing my protests for the sake of peace, for the sake of keeping family intact. And that silence became permission. It told them I could be sidelined. That was my mistake. I gave away ground that should never have been surrendered. The truth is not gentle. If you are over 45, if you have given decades to children, to work, to keeping others afloat, you may face the moment when they try to write you out. When it comes, you cannot meet it with nostalgia or pleading. You meet it with record, with proof, with the undeniable weight of your own work. The younger ones may have the stage, but the archive is yours. Guard it, keep it, use it. If family betrays you, let that betrayal be the crack through which truth enters. Do not beg for recognition, force it into the light. And if you're watching me now, wondering if you have the strength left, I'll tell you this: it doesn't take strength, it takes refusal. Refuse to vanish, refuse to be edited out. You don't need their permission to exist in your own story. To every woman, every man, who has been called forgettable by the ones they gave everything to, I promise you, you are unforgettable. All you need is the courage to remind them. Thank you for walking with me through this. If my story gave you even 1 ounce of resolve, stay close. There are more stories like mine, and we'll face them together. Subscribe if you wish. I'll be here, always.